I'm sure more people will actually have more questions as we get to the Q&A. So, well, thanks again for the team from Hong Kong, the Arup team here in Hong Kong. Thank you for actually doing this mobility webinar for us. And then today we are very grateful to have Greg Yager, FAIA, joining us from Canada. So, Greg, can you actually give us a little introduction on this webinar and also introduce our speaker?
Well, thank you. President of AIA Shanghai. Also, I'm the AIA International Region Strategic in your invitation to the national board at AIA. I'm an architect and an urban designer. I worked for 40 years with Callis and RTKL in Shanghai and in Hong Kong. I'm a master planner and an urban designer. So when Vicky asked me to be part of this program tonight, I thought it was a very interesting topic and agreed to do this. That has become one of the best topics of discussion in this new world that we're living in. Do we keep cars? Do we open up our streets? How do we recapture some of this space for people to accommodate the demands that we see in the future for our health and our tonight, our colleagues from Arup. First, let me introduce Carmen Chu. Carmen's the director of Arup's transport consulting team. She's a chartered engineer and a qualified planner, which I think brings an interesting perspective to transportation because she understands the companies of planning and transportation and how they work together. She really appreciates the planning constraints and opportunities that exist in smart city design in both transportation and traffic engineering. And currently, she's working on several high-profile intelligent transportation projects in Hong Kong, and she's also working in Kowloon as well on several major projects. So she's our first speaker this evening. Our second speaker is Lian.Duan. She has a master's in urban planning and transportation engineering as well. She's a professional engineer and a senior engineer at Arup. She works as a consulting engineer. She's moved to Hong Kong recently from New York, and where she was involved in many large-scale urban transportation planning projects. She works with cities, public authorities to create transportation visions that incorporate urban design, advanced technologies, and transportation engineering. She also is involved in a number of, excuse me, of current policy assessments and introducing connected and autonomous vehicles in Hong Kong. She brings a world of experience to this panel and this conversation as well. So let me open it up to both Carmen and Lian and let them carry on with the presentation. And we're looking forward to having a robust discussion about transportation in the cities and in the future.
So Lian, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Greg, for your introduction, and thanks all for joining us tonight in this webinar organized by AIA in different time zones all around the globe. Especially, it's a bit of challenge, especially for those having holiday tomorrow. Stay for this webinar. Lian and I are from Arup, a global team of engineer, designer, planners, where you can always find us from any office across the 33 countries near your place. Both of us are based in Hong Kong now, the headquarters of our 17 office in East Asia. We are from the Intelligent Mobility team in Transport Consulting in Hong Kong office. Today, we are going to discuss the latest trend of urban mobility, and we as engineer, architects, or investor in this webinar, how we should react to all this change in our communities and built environments. We will also cover how the operational strategy using digital technologies are transforming our mobility system, and also we shape our cities to extend beyond transportation and unlocking the ecosystem of mobility. We will discuss where we are in this convergence and how we should react to our post-pandemic future. We will divide today's discussion into 3 main sessions. First, I will lead the discussion on the emerging mobility trends. Then Lian will talk about the details of new mobilities, covering connected autonomous vehicle, mobility as a service, etc., and how our cities and built environments should be respond to them. Finally, there will be a discussion on the rethink of our urban resilience in the post-pandemic era. Let's kickstart this session with an warm-up exercise. Look at the photos on your screen. They are photos of traffic congestions in different cities. Now, please join me to use the chat function where you can type your message in the Q&A in the Zoom function. Please type as many as you can for the names of the cities you can spot out from the photo. See how many most congested city in the world that you can identify. You will have 10 seconds. Let me try. Yeah, New York, Hong Kong, Beijing, wow, Seoul, Tokyo, Thailand, yeah, more to come. 5 more seconds. There we are, check the answer. Thanks for your response to help us to list out the most congested cities. Just in 10 seconds. Yes, you can do it in 10 seconds. We can all do this because traffic congestion is becoming part of our daily life that matters. It takes away 100 hours a year from our precious time with our family and friends, not to mention the associated social costs. So what should we engineer do? Building new roads and highways endlessly to cope with the demand, or adopting the urban planning approach to move activities outside city centers? Our experience in the past decades tell us that these measures could not really answer the ever-changing needs of urban mobility. Our mobility in future is heavily influenced by the convergence of key technologies, as well as other social trends. For instance, last mile connectivity solutions like car sharing and active mobility using e-bike, e-scooter are going to emerge as potential solutions for some of the core mobility challenges that we are now facing in our cities. Other global trends, including the increase in automation, digital connectivities, vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to everything, focus on emissions and carbon footprint reduction solutions, as well as shifting from vehicle ownership to usership under a shared economy. Increasingly, the industry is shifting away from the cars as a product to cars as a service, to deliver the mobility service with a key focus to improve the health and well-being. We can group the mobility trend into 6 main themes. The first mobility trend is the boom in the number of connected devices. Every transport mode, every household, every single person will be connected by 2025. The booming of connecting devices will facilitate connected and autonomous vehicle communications. Connectivity will serve as the platform that is required for all future digital services. Electromobility and environmentally friendly modes of transport will lead all the future mobility options as they can answer to our focus on health and well-being. The shifting of vehicle ownership to usership on a shared mobility platform paves the way for the on-demand mobility as a service. To achieve this shared mobility concept, we would require a policy support for an open data source so that all stakeholders can join support a real-time platform to include any combination of transport mode and provide all-in-one services from travel planning to payment. In the future, cars will be operating in a cognitive system. They will talk to each other, to the smart highway, to the smart traffic lights, and be guided all the way to their parking facilities. Vehicles will be programmed to keep a safe distance from each other. Trucks will deliver goods by a designated route within a preset schedule of time. All this movement will operate and update each other under a real-time mobility information system. The transport industry will be continuously influenced by the above key mobility trends that have the potential to change its current transport structure, ecosystem, and value propositions. This includes our desire to shape our future mobility system by balancing social, economic, and environmental sustainability with the Sustainable Development Goals embedded in our design. If you look at this governance structural maturity curve for the smart cities, you will agree with me that we need our government to join us on this roadmap. We are still somewhere in between level 2 and 3 before we could have all the mobility trends embedded in our transport infrastructure and policy as part of the smart mobility's smart cities mechanism. Our future mobility requires all of us to work together to set the vision and challenge to form our facility and system as a bottom-up approach, as well as a top-down approach with a policy framework in order to deliver a truly embedded mobility solution for all users. Our goal is to work together to influence our client so that we could prepare for a new era of user-focused mobility. In the next session, Lian will talk about the key elements in the new mobility trends, covering connected and autonomous vehicle, shared mobility, electrifications, and operational strategy. She will also cover how our city and built environment should respond to them.
Right. Thanks, Carmen. So in the next section, we're going to have a deep dive into the different technologies, understand what they are, and also understand what they actually mean for our cities and the built environment. So when we are talking about the mobility trends, as Carmen mentioned before, we're really talking about this word called ACES, which is autonomous, connected, electric, and shared. And on top of that, we're layering the operational strategies and the data. And each of the elements are gonna have profound impact in how we think about our city. And they're also moving at different paces. I wanna mute this. They're also moving at different paces, and some of them are at a higher level of maturity, and some of them are quite new to the market. So let's take a look at what they actually means for those. So first of all, the autonomous vehicle, or also AVs. So this diagram basically shows you the key components for the autonomous vehicle, which are the vehicles who can drive themselves, basically. And there are 4 layers of autonomous vehicle we need to consider here. First of all, sorry, I think there's some voices. Okay. So first of all, there's a layer to understand where the location is. To achieve this, the vehicles usually use the mapping data, the GPS, and some sensor to understand where they actually are. And the next layer is for them called perception. So they use a combination of cameras, and LiDAR, and radar, and also sensors to understand, okay, what's actually around me, like, to recognize all the objects like, traffic lights, your lanes, and other vehicles or pedestrians. And the next level is prediction. So they actually use all this data using a machine learning or engineering algorithm to analyze all this data and to understand and decide what will happen. And the next level is planning. So bring all those data inputs. Autonomous vehicles have the behavior prediction software to and determine what's the appropriate course and what kind of path of travel they need to take. So by understanding that, I also want to introduce the level of vehicle autonomy. So we usually follow the SAE, the Society of Automatic Engineering standards, to divide the levels of autonomy into 5 levels. Well, there's also a level 0, which just means there's no automated functions at all. And between level 1 and 2, this is where the driver will still need, this is where your assistant driving features come from, and the driver still need to hold the vehicle, hold the steering wheel, and be in charge at all the times. And starting from level 3, this is where the vehicles can actually drive themselves, but the drivers need to be ready to take action at any time of notice. And starting from level 4, this is actually where the true autonomy comes from, but the driver does not need to pay attention at all, so we call it mind off, but they can only be operated into a certain situation, like a certain, such as geographic boundary. And starting from level 5, this is where they don't have any restrictions and the vehicles can go anywhere. As you probably can tell from here, starting from level 3, we really would be looking at different legislative adjustments, because that's where your driver is not really in charge of the vehicles anymore. So I also want to show some of the urban use cases for autonomous vehicles. Autonomous vehicles has a lot of different uses in different environments. But when we're talking about in an urban setting, there's some examples I'm showing here, including like low mid-speed shuttles, such as the one you can see in the West Kowloon Cultural District in Hong Kong. And it could also be formed as a personal vehicle owned by different people. And it could form a ride-sharing fleet, such as your Didi or Uber. And then it could also provide logistics options. And the different options would actually have different implications for our cities, which we'll dive into a little bit deeper later. And then there's a lot of attention to autonomous vehicle, but there's actually the connected future we often ignored or overlooked. So this is where the vehicles can share the information with other vehicles and its environment, such as the traffic lights, the infrastructure around it. And this is a really powerful future, and it's maturing at a quicker rate than those for autonomous vehicles right now. And using this will actually allow the authorities or your cities to share the information with the vehicle through some sort of in-vehicle dashboard or and because of this rich data information sharing, a lot of the benefits actually falls into the improved safety and also improved efficiency and the productivity side. And then here's the electrical vehicle, which is the E part of the ACES. And you can probably tell like the electric vehicles looks pretty much like your normal vehicle often. And they could offer significant environmental benefits because they are zero emission. And they could also offer lifetime saving costs depending on the sectors of the application. Because right now, a lot of the concerns about electric vehicle adoption is, first of all, is the price of the vehicle. It's actually still pretty high compared. It's coming down because battery price really came down for the past 10 years. And we can continue to see that if it continues falling, it could at one day match the price of your internal combustion engine vehicle. And also there's the perception of the charging, the existing, the provision of charging infrastructure is another factor, and also on the technology itself. So what does electric vehicle actually mean for our cities? There's I would say there are 3 main considerations, at least for us planners or engineers or architects or should consider, is from the policy standpoint of view, EVs actually only zero emission at the point of use. So when we're talking about thinking about the adopting EV policies, we really need to think about, okay, where the electricity come from. And also there's emissions from the manufacture process as well. And another part is there's a convergence for electric vehicle connected and autonomous vehicle together. So when we are considering our built environment, we need to consider the need for all of them as well. And the third one is a big one for a lot of our clients as well. It's the strategic locations for charging and where they should be located, where the electricity come from, and what form of it from. And then there's different permits may needed for your developments, depending on the type of charging you're putting. As you can see, some of the rapid charging are actually pretty big in size, and they could also charge on street. And the picture down there is one of our projects. We're looking at on-street induction charging for the buses. So those could all affect your design. So the last element of the ACES is shared. As Carmen mentioned, we have seen a global trend of the shifting ownership to usership. And here are all the forms. There's a lot of forms of shared mobility we're talking about, and such as the on-demand bus, the ride sharing, and the car sharing. And also, you probably have seen this around the globe. For the past few years, is shared bike and shared e-scooters coming to their streets and your neighborhoods. So those all setting the foundation to mobility of service. Because technology is one thing. We work in the transport mobility sector. Our focus has really been to provide, the public how to connect them and how to help them to get to A to B as cheap as possible, as easy as possible, as stress-free as possible. So this is where mobility as a service really comes in to tie everything together. And it is basically a platform. Say we use all this technology combined with the data to create a single user platform that allows you as a user to reserve and pay for all your transport choices. So that puts the pressure on the network providers to get your service. So once you reserve the service, for example, you don't really need to care, like, if I have access to the mass transit, or it's an on-demand bus, or ride sharing that's picking me up. And then this really allows the user to have an increased access to a range of options. And they also give the city, reduce the needs for the city to pay for some of the major investments, such as your new roads or rail infrastructure. And they also provide a range of data for the authorities or for the cities to optimize and manage your transport system. So with that, the last one we want to share, in with is a operational pricing. So you're probably familiar with some of this because we're looking at mostly three, I would say, overarching typologies here. So the first one is called price to usage. This is one that's probably most of us are familiar with. Is think about your road tolling or your bridge tolling. You have to pay a toll to use certain facilities. However, we have also seen an increasing discussion on the charging for your curb space, because curb space is really a valuable asset for your loading and unloading activities. And then the second one is called price the place. This is your zone-based charging. So which is example, like, there's a concept about congestion charging. So if you enter a zone, you will automatically get charged. And such as, also low emission charging we have seen in like London or Singapore. And the third one, we call it the price the trip. So this is basically, a really powerful way to discourage the use of single occupant vehicles, because we can charge or by the kilometers they travel. Also, it could be added as a per ride basis to your ride hailing or ride sharing services. So mobility pricing, like I said, is really powerful because it could help tackle all those problems, like congestion, Carmen just mentioned. Also, increasingly important one is infrastructure deficit for a lot of the maintenance, and it really creates a source of revenue and helps to shift the demand and the travel behavior. And it's even more powerful if the revenue is used to improve transit or active mobility. So look at so here are all the trends and the details we just shared. But what do they actually mean for our cities? I have to say, as a planner, or engineer or architect, this is a really, really challenging question for us. And why? Because the future is really uncertain. So if we have this conversation like 5 years ago, we're probably like all excited about the coming of autonomous vehicles that are gonna come in the next, 2 to 3 years. We need to get all prepared. At that point, we probably thought, okay, we're at the tip of the toe of the curve, and everything is gonna pick up from there. But however, you probably have seen what happened for the past 2 and 3 years. There's up and downs of all these technologies. So we think, it's actually we're in the middle of the hype cycle. And it could actually happen to other technologies, emerging trends we just talked about, such as, shared rides. There could be continuous hype cycle in the future as well, because the different technology, like we just mentioned, they're going to affect us at very different times. And but they do have their benefits, as we mentioned. There's a general discussion about they could provide a safer streets for us, and they could also mean less parking for the city, and they provide us rich data for the authority to use for the users, and it allows the cities to do more with less. And then it could accelerate our electrification process and really have this environmental benefits for us. But what are the challenges we could face? First of all, we could face the decline in transit ridership because of the competing mobility options coming up. And we also could see more mileages if we don't manage it well, and we could see empty vehicles going around. And there is a concern about cybersecurity. And also the long-term strategic investment from the city is really important. How can we not just react to each trend, but also factor in the trend into our current planning and think about our investment cycle to consider those. And then there's a labor issue. You probably have seen this around the news for the increasing automation going up. So what can we do? I want to share a little of my favorite quote actually from Professor John Miles of University of Cambridge. He was also a former board member from Arup. Because we want to argue that the future transport system would actually give us ability to manipulate our transport system to fit our cities, rather than manipulating our cities to accommodate our transport system. What it actually means is, you want to show us how to adapt the mobility technology to our cities instead of the other way around. And if the technology can help us to redesign our needs to move people instead of just moving cars. And so our streets are not just filled with single occupancy vehicles. And they look very different from what we've seen in the first picture Carmen just shared. So we would like to introduce an integrated user-centric approach to tie everything together, because technology are not going to be the solution by themselves. So under this approach, everything needs to be linked back to the city's vision, what they actually want to achieve, how we want to move people and move goods instead of just moving vehicles. And then we need to think about beyond the physical infrastructure, which is what we are pretty familiar with as planners or architects. And because there's an additional layer of data, we need to consider how the data is transmitted, where they go, how are they used. And though all of those linked back to the user, the needs of our public, and on top of the operational strategies we just talked about, such as the mobility of the services. So we're going to look into a little bit more about how we can cope, share some of the thinkings from us, how we can cope with those changes from a city, streets, even a building perspective. So from the city perspective, like we mentioned, we need to adapt the new technology to really align with the city's vision. So everything is linked there, and it's going to be looking very different from city to city. So what's suitable for Hong Kong, or may not be aligned with what's suitable for Shanghai. And if we can augment this vision to promote shared mobility and provide high quality transit. So it's gonna, bring very powerful change to our environment. And then we need to set contextually appropriate operation. What this means is we need to think about for different environment. For example, like urban, suburban, limited access campuses, they would have different operational characteristics, and the way they adopt or the different technology solution will look very different. And then for cities, we also need to think about the public perceptions and regulations around those. And for the entire city, we could also have the option to provide a more permeable street network and reimagine our street hierarchy from there. So one of the possible scenarios we're actually showing here is in the future cities, or in the future planning, we could provide strategic external road, which are like higher speed connecting to different cities in the region. And then people can get transferred at this mobility hub at the edge. And in the center is filled with low speed last mile transport options in the center. So mobility hub, what it is, concept to link multiple transport options at key locations in your city. They could be at your different levels, your city level, your district level, even at the neighborhood level. And they will allow accommodate different shared uses and accommodate the increase in pickup and drop-off needs. So this could really offer us an interesting angle from, we could potentially develop some of our existing car parks into mobility hubs in the city. And for the streets, the emerging mobility could directly impact our usage of our streets, because the prioritization of shared, connected, and autonomous vehicle could free up, street road capacity, and then it will allow us to redefine how we use our streets, and the proportion of the spare space could then be provided to other active mobility or public transit or share rides. And there's also another factor to consider is there are going to be increasing demand for the pickup and loading zones in the future because of the shared mobility, emerging shared mobility. As well as we mentioned before, we need to think about the charging facilities for the on-street charging or opportunity charging. And the last concept is we could actually provide adaptive use based on the changes, the demand changes in the future. So this is just showing one of the examples, case studies we did for San Francisco, where Arup did this with Perkins Will to rethink how the future new mobility street could look like for 4th Street. So basically, we did a study and realized there's going to be the higher penetration of shared rides and autonomous vehicles. There's going to be less lanes needed for the street. So this allows us to provide a better, like safer, attractive ped and bike facility, and also allow the high capacity transit and increase the drop-off space, which potentially could transfer to adaptive use, and also still provide adequate capacity here. Moving on to buildings. So what could this mean to our buildings? Well, as we're not really architects, so just offering some of our thoughts. And there could be opportunities, to generate energy and data. This is one of the pilot in Hong Kong for the pavement to actually generate energy. And so those data generated together could actually link to your mobility service in your public space, also maybe in airports, inside the buildings. We have seen some of the cases as well. And at the same time, the safety aspects of the vehicles could eliminate, some of the curb lines to your to the buildings. So they could have more interactions with the vehicles. Could actually have more interactions with the buildings, and to provide this truly door-to-door services. Such as the example we have, for a Ford campus, we did this with a slow header master plan. The last one I want to share about is parking. This is actually, my favorite topic. Is we're gonna say, because parking takes up tremendous amount of space in our cities, and what the emerging mobility trends could help us to rethink the parking provisions in our city. And we think they are going to lower the parking ratio for our cities, and we should provide a flexible and adaptable usage, and think about provide shared and charging facilities, as well as consider pickup and drop off areas. So because the connected features of the vehicles can really help us to identify the parking and make the existing parking more efficient, and autonomous vehicles could really require less parking, or parking at less premium locations, and potentially the share ride would require less vehicles. So do we know actually how many parking space we're providing for our city? This is an example from Hong Kong in the past. So it's not, the answer is really not one, because think about it. When you have a vehicle, you have a parking space at work, you have a parking space at home at least. So the ratio is actually pretty high. From Hong Kong's perspective, this rate has actually come down for the past 10 years by about like 25%. This is pretty low already. I think in the North America, this ratio, parking space per vehicle, is over 2 at least. But this doesn't really mean, we actually have solved this problem in Hong Kong. It just means there are a lot of illegal parking right now, and the parking demand doesn't really cope up with the increase in demand for vehicles. However, if we bring the emerging technology into the picture, they could actually come true at one day. Why? Because there's different pressures required for the parking, and there could be downward pressures to require for less parking. As we've probably seen from a lot of the East Asian countries or Southeast Asian cities, there are still very strong upward pressures to demand for more parkings right now as the city continue to grow and people continue to increase their vehicle usage. However, with the introduction with the shared mobility, the autonomous vehicle, and in other innovative technologies, we could potentially provide less parking for to meet the same mobility demand. So this is what this diagram really shows. We're increasing sharing but not growing. So with this, how do those pressures do not bring the impact at the same time. The rapid urban growth is actually real, and the technology is still in their development. So how do we manage this? So we need to think about a phase approach. In the near term, when the city is still growing, when the needs of the parking still increasing rapidly, we could provide some of the parking demand through different parking provisions. First of all, could be your temporary parking. That's your service parking or the temporary stackers. And then we could provide some of the repurposable structures that could be converted to different usage in the future, or even convert to mobility hubs. And the third category is your permanent parking, which is your structured parking, like the car parks. So when in the near term, they could still go up to meet your peak parking demand. But in the future, when we see all this downward pressure, the technology really working, the demand for the parking reduced, we could potentially eliminate the temporary parking and convert the repurposed parking and only keep the permanent parking for this. So this avoids overbuild and is truly adaptable, flexible approach to cope with all those changes. So that's it for this section. Greg, do you have any questions?
Well, I don't think it's a question. I'd like to offer just some observations. And I think your earlier slide where you talked about, should we allow the city to shape transportation, or should we allow transportation to shape the city? Mm-hmm. And I think we're finding across the world that we have a number of varieties of situations. where we have existing cities that need to repurpose themselves to become, I think, more human-centric.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think one of the challenges we face whenever we start talking about technology is technology begins to become the focus of the conversation and not the result of what that technology brings.
Yeah.
So, you know, your example of San Francisco, where you were looking at kind of repurposing the street into a more human place, I would keep coming back and saying that how we look at cities in a humanist way, not from an engineering perspective, not from a transportation perspective. The second point is, you know, we live in, and we also live in different societal situations. You know, in China, it's still a societal wish to own a car. It's hard to convince people, you know, you can live in Shanghai and you can live in probably the most pedestrian friendly city in Asia that I know of, and yet people still want to buy cars. And when you've got a very good urban transportation network that allows you to get anywhere in the city safe, convenient, and cheap.
Right.
So, you know, we have to overcome that societal dependence upon car ownership, which I think is an important point. And then finally, I liked your point on energy, where you showed the mats where people were walking to generate electricity. How close are we to the technology where roads could actually generate electricity?
There has been.
Those are my 3 questions for you at this point.
Sure. Should we save this for later, or we can have a discussion right now?
We can save it for later,
right.
If you wish, because you're on quite a roll when you were going, so I was surprised when you broke. Also, one fourth point, there's a question that Sarah Murray has raised too about personal privacy and how in all of this, with all of this data flying around our streets through all of these transponders and receivers and cars and mobile phones and computers, how do we protect our personal privacy in this really kind of Internet of Things world?
Yeah, right. I guess maybe we can, yeah.
Why don't you answer my first question and then you can move on and answer.
Sure. Yeah, so let's go back to the comments about, you know, how to, the argument, from my favorite quote is, we need to adapt our, you know, to use the technology to adapt our vision to the cities. That's really, you know, what we really means. Because we have seen, I guess, you know, I'm not old enough to see that, but we keep hearing about, you know, first of all, the introduction of a automobile, how it changed our city. Because back then, we just started to build all the roads to accommodate the, you know, the emerging technology back then. And then now, you know, as planners, we're still trying to, you know, change some of the you know, the urban environment, like what we have done in the past. I have to say that. So this is really opportunities for us, right? Like how we can actually use these technologies to actually link back to the vision of the city. And I like your comments about, you know, we have used the different cities may have different forms right now, and they also have different visions, like what they want to be. So, you know, there really has to be, you know, to bring back to what the cities want to achieve and how we can use the technology to help to enhance that vision. Because just give you an example, I think that would be, from my perspective, for, you know, for us as the planners, it will be a terrible, terrible situation if we just started building roads just for autonomous vehicles, segregated, in order for the autonomous vehicle to, you know, to come to our city much faster. And for example, require every pedestrian to wear some sort of wearable devices, so the vehicles can detect us. You know, so that's the other way around. We should really approach the technology from the other way around. What do we really need, and how we can bring everything together from there.
Well, I think we have to.
Yeah.
You know, I think we are moving into a situation where a lot of people do not appreciate the role of the urban designer in shaping our cities. That we kind of live in this world of between what I would call architecture or building design and the engineering and the infrastructure. And I think we only need to look at cities like Beijing that really has great architecture, but doesn't necessarily have great urban design.
Yeah.
So that environment between the edge of the curb and the buildings is really kind of a no man's land, if you will, of places. So it's real important, particularly at the city level, that urban design, architecture, and engineering all have to work together to really create this humanist city.
Yeah,
it's a collective effort. It's a team sport. It's not the individual sport of either the engineer or the architect.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that in this post-pandemic city that we will create, and I think you're going to get into in the next section, is, you know, how do we adapt to this new social order that we're going to have to live with, perhaps forever, in how we keep our cities. I mean, I went and had a post-COVID session with a former RTKL employee of mine in London, here in Toronto, and it was really weird sitting in a park 8 feet apart trying to carry on a conversation, you know. So it is going to change. We have to change how we work together to create our cities.
Yep.
And they are going to be different. They are, and I think always the optimist. I think it's going to be better, not worse. And so I think how we think about transportation, how we think about that last mile, is real important. And you know, here in Toronto, I was trying to buy an electric bike, an e-bike, so I could ride to work, to the office that I'm working in, and you can't find one. People are back ordered 5, 6, 7 months to be able to buy bicycles here in Canada. And more people are riding bicycles and getting out of their cars and riding to work. And it's, I think we're in a very important transformational shift from the before CV19 city to the post CV19 city. I think our cities will be different.
Right. So I guess then you will find in our next section, we actually would offer, you know, from our, at least from our perspective, some of the approaches, you know, what we have discussed before, you know, in the pre-pandemic world still applies. We still need this, you know, user-centric integrated approach.
Yeah, I always like looking at wonderful urban images of cities like you're showing on your screen. I always like seeing people in places, so I'm excited you two that you're presenting to us.
Yeah. So so we're gonna get into our next section. It's a really interesting few months in the past, and also very challenging, I would say, from, you know, a planning or engineering perspective for us. So how can we rethink the urban resilience in the context of post-pandemic world? So this is just, you know, we look up, you know, what resilient urban mobility really means. And it is to provide a sustainable, integrated, flexible, and robust mobility options, actually kind of consistent with what we just discussed from the start of, you know, from Carmen's introduction. And during even normal times and the time of crisis. So we just talk about normal times or in the future, but what does the time of crisis look like? So we look into a little bit into the data to see what it could tell us and what has changed during this period. So this is from Baidu. Actually, it shows the travel pattern during and after the COVID-19 pandemic in mainland China. So we looked at 5 cities together, including Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen, as well as Wuhan, which is the purple line here. And when all of this travel is actually based on January 13th data as a baseline, and the percentage of reduction is based on that. So you can see from here, when the pandemic started late January, or become aware, you know, at least the public become aware in the late January, and Wuhan started to lock down in January 23rd. We've seen a drastic reduction of travel from all the cities, as low as to 10%, which also overlaps with, you know, the Chinese New Year holiday. People usually take 2 weeks if you are from out of town. And the official holiday is like 1 week. But you can see, you know, during that period, the travel has reduced to about to the 10% or 20% in all of the cities. After Chinese New Year, travel started picking up, but very slowly. In March, it's still kind of quite low. But this is data actually goes to early May. You can see for Shanghai or Guangzhou and Shenzhen, it actually recovered to about 80 to 90% of the pre-pandemic travel. And Wuhan, obviously they opened much slower than opened in early April. And by the time this data actually generated in early May, they still only have about 40 to 50% of the travel recovered. So apparently, we heard like China is ahead of a curve, but what the world looks like right now. That this is from a different source. It's from Apple Maps, but we use the same, keep it almost as consistent, starting from January 13th as a baseline. So what the world looks like. Obviously in Hong Kong, the lockdown or the awareness came at the same time, pretty much with mainland China, and it just started dropping in January. And unfortunately, we don't have the transit data for Hong Kong for this one. But for the other cities, we can see there's different colors. Like the red one shows you're driving, and transit and walking is the different colors. So the other cities locked down much later than than China. And right now we started to see them starting to opening up. This data actually goes to early June. But some of the interesting story you can see from the data is, in the general trends, after city moving up, the travel start picking up. But at the same time, driving, the red line picks up much faster than the purple line transit. So this could be partly due to the perception, of the safety and the public's perception. But interestingly, I also look at the Hong Kong data from APTR website. I realized Hong Kong is actually doing much better. You probably, if you're in Hong Kong, the train is actually pretty packed right now. And we have already recovered about 85% as of May to the pre-pandemic situation. So this is a really mixed message, and we're still in the midst of it, to see what's going to happen. And during the pandemic, some of the emerging mobility really formed some options to response of the pandemic, such as, in the Wuhan, Gaude provided this on-demand ride share for medical staff working there, and also provided, autonomous deliveries for the essential goods for the medical staff in the during quarantine. And New York City, actually, they started to close down the street. I think the last time I checked, as much as 60-something miles of streets closed to cars, just to open much more streets, space for pedestrians. So there's opportunity for us to rethink the urban space. Oh. It went to the, yeah, just click and yeah.
I think your data that you're showing is really, I think, based more on safety. Here in Canada, I find that more and more people are driving,
yeah,
and more people are not going into public places. I mean, you can go down into downtown Toronto, and it's a ghost town still. I mean, it isn't a vibrant city as much as it used to be.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting. I think people are still very concerned here in North America about their personal safety.
Mm-hmm.
I think it really is forcing people to kind of lock themselves at home and not get out into public transportation.
Yeah.
Carmen, your voice is muted.
Hi. Yes, there's an observation that people are trying to use active mobility to try to bike, try to use the scooter to get some fresh air. So we do see the change in the behavior. So what we say, there are always two sides of a coin. This is in fact a great opportunity for us to influence our clients to rethink about the approach for post-pandemic future. Instead of calling it a time of crisis, what we just mentioned, we would look forward to it as a new normal. We're trying to put it and look at it more positively. We must join our efforts to continue to embrace the digital technology. People shifting to private mode, if there is an autonomous vehicle shoving them, there may be a better idea in the future mobility towards a healthier and more sustainable mobility options. In Arup, we have a task force team to understand both the short-term and longer-term implications of the pandemic impact in our new normal. In short terms, there will be a change. We know that there is a change in travel demand, which Greg has just mentioned. On the mode choice, shifting to more personal transport, maybe a more desire to shift to automations and to rearrange our urban space to invite more local social activities in adequate and safe spaces by taking away unnecessary road space. Here are some examples to turn the unnecessary road space into other form of more useful social space for the enjoyment of the public. The process could be quite spontaneous or more permanent to evolve into our placemaking design. One of the examples is you see the pictures down here is from Hong Kong, a busy road on the Hong Kong island, where the local peoples found that along the streets is always roadworks, and but there is no traffic congestion really happening in the area. So it means the roadworks which keep the traffic lane closed actually, if we turn it into more meaningful uses with more greening, it would be allow more social activity there. We can harness the power from data and our well-established simulation tools to recreate our routines in public space. This is an example of such application to redesign the queuing system in the airport. Developed in-house by Arup based on the research into the science of human movement and refined by validations, this tool provides technical analysis of people's movement through physical spaces. This allows us to test the impact of different queuing space and security arrangement to see the impact on safety, efficiency, and throughput rates. Other wider application could be found in train station and in arena for major events, allowing us to estimate safe capacity to meet our challenge in the new normal. We anticipate that some more changes in behavior will have longer-term bearing in shaping our future mobility, including remote working and communications like the webinar we are now having. We have Greg from the other side of the group together with us from Hong Kong in the same webinar. There will be more virtual conferencing, virtual meeting happening in the new normal, as well as the use of active travel that we just mentioned. We will also put more emphasis on health and well-being in all of our mobility activities. Our infrastructure should be targeted to provide response to all these focus, including shifting to shared mobility, connected, and smart infrastructure with a new mindset for resilience in the face of climate hazards and health risks. Let's work together to prepare a resilient mobility system, which focus on the user's need, embracing digital technology in our physical infrastructure, and fully taking into account flexibility on a real-time responsive platform. To close this session, I would like to share with you this, my favorite image of how intelligent mobility should look like. This image can best illustrate the ultimate goal of intelligent mobility in achieving a healthy lifestyle under a shared economy for the enjoyment of us and our future generations. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for that very inspiring presentation. You've made a lot of progress in your presentation since we had our dry run through, so it's very impressive body of material. Let me ask, I guess, you had a very interesting slide, I think 2 slides back, where you were showing people kind of reclaiming the street and really turning it more into their personal space. And I guess my question to you is, we're sitting here at this point where, as I think I stated earlier, the humanist aspects of our streets and our spaces and our experiences really needs to, I think, bring more sustainable thinking into how we deal with these environments that we are creating. And the changes in transportation could be a key element of that. As AIA, we're kind of looking at three pillars of kind of how we can help shape our future environment. One is around the environment and climate change. How do we adapt to climate change? Second is how do we create equity in our cities by allowing people to have a better position in life by achieving better places to work, better ways to live their lives. And then third is how do we achieve equality? How do we extend the positive benefit of city living into our cities? And I think every city probably that we are in right now has the areas of the city that have and the areas of the cities that have not. They don't have the benefits, they don't have the schools, they don't have the environments that are as equitable to other people. How can we use transportation to help lift all of those three elements: environment, equity, and equality?
We have an example from Hong Kong trying to reshape a area in the business district. What we did is actually we work with the government. The government has adopted a very proactive approach. They have their own office built in the middle of that cities, of that district. They work in a container office actually that allow opportunity for the locals to engage with them. So they will understand what they really wish to have in terms of placemaking, how they wish to, how the locals wish to convert the road space for the area, which type of street arts they want to add to the area, whether they wish to have more greening or they want to have more painting in the area. So they also invite the local artists to do some painting on the streets. So it's quite spontaneous, but we could say it's what the locals want. So this kind of design model we help the government to do in that district have received quite good comments from the locals. So it's kind of the model that we can think about is we don't need to do something really top down, really policy driven, but it could be quite some from the neighborhood, from the placemaking approach.
So would you say that the process is more bottom up, or is it kind of a little bit of both, top down and bottom up?
I think both, yeah, with the help of the policy from the government, because they make the move. If they're not sitting in an air-conditioned office away from that district, don't know what happened in the area, so they move into that district. They move in and engage with the local people. So this is top down, but they listen to the locals. So it and create some local activities and placemaking ornament in that area. So it would be a bottom-up approach. Yeah.
I think what we're finding, if you look at say Barcelona, for example, Barcelona is looking at taking their city block system and really trying to create more super blocks so that they eliminate cars and vehicle traffic in these kind of, they'll take like 9 of the blocks and take that interstitial space in those 9 blocks and they will give it back to the people. Playgrounds, public spaces, walking areas, bicycle paths, and eliminate the roads. Do you see possibly in Hong Kong something like that happening where we can really, with autonomous vehicles, we can begin to use less road surface for vehicles and maybe returning some of these streets back to people? The total street?
Yeah, definitely. It's and also it's not just about the autonomous vehicle either, right? It's also about what we talk about using the different tools, the technology as a tool, such as bringing mobility pricing to really ensure the positive, like the sum of the travel behaviors. And that also falls back to your previous question about the equity. Like those are some of the really powerful tools. If we can use some of the revenues to make targeted investment to the disadvantage, to the disadvantaged areas, like, that would help to create a more equitable space. And also with the introduction of, the shared rights, the shared mobility and the autonomous vehicles, we could potentially see the reduction of need for the street space. So that's where, we can start to rethink. Whatever we have shown here in the picture, those are all temporary, measures. Actually, the Broadway example from New York was from 2 years ago, but this was, some of the classic examples of, how you can just, do a very temporary street printing to change it. But, in the future, we could see this more permanent, start to taking some of the space back, just as, the case we showed for the San Francisco one. We did a case study that.
Yeah.
Right.
Talk about to start with. To start with how we move on to our digital and future mobility. It would also require a top-down decision to have a shared platform, open data platform. I think all cities are trying to establish this platform as a starting point of their first move to a future mobility. With that, we can have our share vehicle, we can have our mobility as a service that come in together and we arrange and we imagine the trips in a more organized and connected system under a single platform. So we are trying to do that. But I do see a question from the participants on the privacy issue as a requirements of that. So in dealing with that, actually, we note the concern from the public, and we need to remember the rule of thumb. All information we use for a particular purpose should be on a need to know basis. So we don't need any other data which is not relevant to that particular application. Say, for example, if you are designing a smart traffic light system, which leads to talk to the vehicle passing it, all we need to do is we ask everyone who enter into that area to set up a user account. So you don't, with that, that user account can be anonymous. So you don't need to input your personal data because we don't need to know it. You just need to know vehicle ID number 1 is entering into that area. He's already passed 4 red light already, so please give him a green light next time. So this is what we need for a system in future. So we could do something to protect the privacy issue.
Before sorry to interrupt. Before we continue to answer the question, please repeat the question one more time. And for all the audience, please post all of your questions to the Q&A. And for the panelists, please also like move some of the images so that for the recording we don't get stuck in that single pages. Yeah, you can continue.
Yeah, I think this whole notion about personal privacy is interesting, and I find it a bit of a dichotomy. In Shanghai, we've installed the kind of the crosswalk cameras. So if you jaywalk or if you venture into the street against the light, it records you and it names you and shames you. And of course, we know that that data is being collected. But yet, in Los Angeles, if you jaywalk in the street, you still get a $35 ticket from the police officer that's standing on the street corner. And I think that those kind of sidewalk cameras would be great in LA. So, but I don't think personal privacy laws will let me do that in the United States. So it's, it's 6 of one, half dozen of another. In some areas, it's a benefit, and in some issues it raises concern. Somebody, an anonymous attendee has raised the question, can you please list both 1, the best city in the world now in terms of advanced transport network, and 2, what do you believe will be the best city in 10 years? I throw that open to both of you.
Yeah, I guess, there's an argument already between me and Carmen.
Quickly state what you think.
Right.
I think the best cities is where people like to stay there. So it would be related to your family, so the best city actually is where you come from. yeah, where you want to stay there. So we are not looking to find a best city. We're trying to emerging the whole things into the best city we would like to stay. So this is how we trying to recreate spaces and recreate the cities into the form that we wish to stay there. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I lived in many cities, like in the
Yeah.
past 10 years. You know, I first hated New York, but when I left, I loved it. When I first come to Hong Kong, I didn't like it, but now I started liking it. So it's kind of hard to pick the best one.
Yeah.
You know, I think the best one for myself, at least, you know, Carmen, feel free to add later, will be the one, you know, you really have a lot of options, like for different people. Like, you know, no matter where you come from, you feel inclusive in the city, and you have the options to get around. And we do see a lot of examples, you know, like some of my least favorite cities, I would say. I'm not gonna name it, but, you know, some people are just restricted to where they are, like, you know, because they didn't have a personal vehicle. That was pretty common, you know, in the first few years when I was in the US. So I think, yeah, the best city would be everyone would have an option.
Well, our questioners are saying they want names. They want you to name names. You're being very politically correct. Adam from Canada, it's good to see a fellow, well, I'm not a Canadian, but it's good to see somebody in my semi-time zone he raised the question, how can we push the policymakers and conservative administrations to move towards a more sustainable use of transit?
What we are trying to do in Hong Kong is they know about the policy. The government know about the policy that can shape a better city, but we need to give them the confidence. So what we are trying to do is we have some proof of concept for our new ideas, bit by bit, and actually finally they will stitch together into a bigger plans so that we can give our policy makers more confidence in moving into a bigger plans. So this is how we're trying to do also with a top-down policy, they support with some proof of concept so that they can see the benefit. They can gauge the public acceptance of those new ideas in the area. Yeah.
Sujata Govada, past president of AIA Hong Kong and a colleague of mine, and we've worked together for a number of years. I'm gonna paraphrase her question because I think you know, she's saying that with the post-pandemic city, our work patterns are changing. People aren't necessarily going to the office 5 days a week. They're not going from 9 to 5. They may be going half a day or even maybe 2 or 3 days a week. So with more people working remotely, what if we take our public infrastructure and start looking at how we begin to reassign the uses in those spaces? And how do we really come back to create a much higher quality, and I'm adding interactive, socially public realm. I mean, I've just moved here to Toronto to work on this project, and I guess I'm appalled at the public environment in the public realm. It's not as high quality outside the downtown core as I thought it is in other cities. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement in how we can rebuild our public realm, of which transportation is really an important part of that. So what are your thoughts on kind of repurposing, reassigning, reorganizing our street structures to accommodate those changes in how people live, work, and play?
I think we touched this, I would say briefly in the presentation as well. Like you said, you know, the post-pandemic world, right? We have seen potentially the change of travel patterns and the reduce of travel demand for our cities. So this could actually expedite the process of what we have just discussed. There's also, you know, could be the redundancy, like all the extra space we could start thinking about to repurpose for our city, especially for our street, because street really occupies a lot of space in the city. And if we need like less lanes out of the street, you can see the examples from New York. Like what I have done is to really change I think that was from Broadway, like I mentioned. There's very, very few demand, the vehicles on there. We did a study there. And we started to just think about how we can convert this back, to bring this back for the city, for the people to use that and really create this more livable environment. And as we mentioned, there could be also to rethink the existing parking structures, like structured parking we have. Like if we don't need as many parking in the future, we could repurpose them into different, like a mobility hub, for example, for the drop off and pick up for the share rides as well. So there's different ways, yeah.
Well, I'd add to that. The fact that people are working more from home may require we don't have as much office space, which may mean we don't need as much parking space. And we also need to reduce the distance between where we live and where we work and provide greater opportunities for housing for lower incomes and young professionals. So part of this repurposing may be to convert some of these parking structures into live-work units, job share place environments, looking at them in a different way so that we can rethink how we live in our cities. I think we're finished with our list of questions. I think we've covered everybody on the question and answer
Brent, I think there was a question from Lee Hong. If you go up the list on the third question down.
I saw that. Let's see. Great presentation. Thanks for it. We know every different city and region has a different mobility strategy to deal with rapid changes we are seeing. I was therefore wondering if you would mind giving me more information on opportunities and challenges of applying MaaS into Hong Kong.
I think the opportunity will come very soon because the Hong Kong government is really ambitious to set up a platform for vehicle to share the mobility data. Once that's been set up, there's a special government department that deal with that setup already in the government hierarchy. So with that single platform that we can share and open our data on where we wish to go and in what time zone, it could later on migrate into the MaaS later on. To fit into the demand of the users move around the cities.
On the other hand, Hong Kong actually has really efficient public transport system. I have to say it's one of the best I have seen after living in so many cities. So there could be implications on what a MaaS could, offer for the city, because we have a really good foundation of public transport as well. So, I think for the policymakers need to be careful now to, underpinning that at the same time.
Yes, somebody asked us on the autonomous attendee, what drove the Barcelona superblock pedestrianization? I honestly don't know. I would imagine it was more of a bottom-up approach.
Yeah, we did a little study on that, to be honest. It's a little both. It's a little both. It's I think first from the vision of the city, because they have this vision to reduce the car dependency and really bring some block like the street life back. So they started this bottom-up approach to identify where this could be. So it's really a mixture in the design process.
As we discussed earlier in the.
I do wanted to actually repeat one of the comments from AIA Singapore. Yi Ki has a observation that Singapore actually there are more people who are actually walking and biking. His observation is slightly different than the graph that you two actually showed from Singapore. Can you explain a little bit more on that one?
Yeah, so that data is actually, well,
sorry,
it's from.
Do you mind to go back to that slide? Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, when we look at data, we need to understand their limitations. If I can see, so let me explain this a little bit. So we look at the two different sources of data in order to get this. Obviously, they're also coming from different providers. So the first one, when we look at China, they're actually from Baidu Maps. Baidu, they look at the different apps, they own to identify the movement of people, what they call the mobility intensity for the cities. And this travel pattern for the worldwide, we actually got from Apple Maps. So what it is they look at the search, the inquiries on directions through their maps. And then this is how they categorize the different modes of people. Okay, if they're doing a search of directions, that means you're probably at least considering, or at least in the process of this this kind of trip. So that's where the data is from, and this is only from January to early June. So it doesn't really cover to like right now. So that, yeah, like I said, there could be limitations because this is really like the search, the intensity of the search from the map is just, a snapshot of what could happen.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Vicky, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Good. There was actually a very great presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Carmen, and thank you, Lian, for actually giving us all the AIA members a really great presentation on this mobility trend and also what the city could look like in this post-pandemic world. I'm going to do just a really quick advertising for AIA. I'm going to do it for AIA Hong Kong first, and IR can probably do a little bit talking just to promote to our members. So for AIA Hong Kong, this coming Friday, we have a happy hours at the PMQ office. So feel free to drop by this Friday if you're in Hong Kong at 6:30 at our PMQ office. The second thing is if you can actually see the backdrop on my screen, our honor and award for AIA Hong Kong is actually open. So if you have any new idea in city plan, if you have any really cool architectural project, please make sure to sign up for it. Greg, can you add a bit more on the AIA IR conference side?
Well, we're getting ready to plan our conference, which we hold every year. This year it will be virtually. It will be virtually done, which is kind of interesting. The board has been meeting with the various chapters to come up with content. We're looking at this being it can be a 4 to 5 day conference. Each chapter will be responsible for setting up and managing part of the content. We see it kind of happening around the globe. So there's a great opportunity, I think, to engage with your fellow IR colleagues around the world. And, if you have any interesting topics that you would like to see if we can include it in the program, depending upon what city you're in, please talk to your chapter president, because we will be submitting these documents to our IR leadership board to be able to vet these programs for our virtual conference. We also will still be having our design awards program. Christine Bruckner, the past president of AIA Hong Kong, has been and Lester has been very active in getting that program up and running again this year. And there should be some information that will be coming out soon about the AIA International Region Design Awards.
There's actually one more question for Arup. It's actually coming from Adam. He asked whether you can actually share this presentation.
I think we will talk to our PR session, so they will upload at a suitable platform.
And, the other questions are to answer to Adam. This webinar has been recorded. Once Arup approve the content, we can probably release it on YouTube, so you can probably review the whole presentation.
We will let our corporation communication team to deal with it.
If you have any questions for Arup team, on the screen right now is the contact information. So feel free to take a screenshot.
Yeah. Sure.
And don't be surprised if we show up at your happy hour.
Also, if you could let us know when this goes live on YouTube. I've had a number of people here in Toronto who are not AIA members ask me if they could view the program because they're talking about transportation and mobility issues here in Toronto.
Yeah, thank you for linking them up to us. Yep.
Will do.
Mm.
All right, thank you. Have a good night, everyone, and well, enjoy your day, Greg.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. Have a good
good
day.
holiday ahead. Yeah.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.